So what is everybody doing with their weekend aside from watching the videos today?
Watching the Kentucky Derby, hopefully for the fashions.
Oh, I did not know the Kentucky Derby was going.
On today. Back today.
I don't follow much sports, so
Kenneth, how was dining out last weekend?
it was lovely.
Was it?
It was fun. For me, the whole thing was okay. I get to wear a new pair of shoes. So, and I don't know how many follow me on Instagram, but I had my shoes repaired, and I don't know if you saw the result.
I've noted, yes, I've noted the cobbler.
Yeah. He's fascinating to me because he does really high end shoe repair. And what we did, the red I felt was a little contrasty. So what he did is I had him mute it down to like more of a burgundy, which I like better. But now I will wear those shoes because the guy that put the sole protectors on, I just know to only let him work on everyday shoes, not the good shoes. Because now that I have these shoes repaired and they look good again, now I will wear them again because I just couldn't take them out of the box. I was so upset when I got them back from the shoe repair. They sat in the box for a year. I wouldn't even look at them. So
I have two questions.
yes.
Are they custom shoes?
No. These they're good shoes, but
Yeah,
they weren't made for me.
yeah. And secondly, what size do you take? I want those white ones so badly.
Good luck. I'm a men's size 8.
Oh, they'd fit. I'm a lady size 10.
Yeah.
So
Well,
when you're done, call me.
Okay. They are the most beautiful shoes I own.
Yeah, they're gorgeous.
Yes. And
Love.
what was interesting is reading, because he posted them on his Instagram too. And, it was interesting to read the comments because, there was one person who said something about it looks like shoes that 1980s Miami drug lords would wear, and,
What's wrong with that anyway?
so
But
my comment was, life is too short to wear boring shoes.
I agree.
Yeah.
They're
So,
fabulous.
but yes, I do love me some good shoes. And so yes, I'm one of the things with things, is looking like things are opening up now. I'm getting reacquainted with all of my wardrobe, all of my shoes, all of my, because I have a lot of everything. And my students, I remember one time I was wearing a pair of shoes that I bought in college, and one of my students said, "Ducky Brown." I said, almost right. These are Florshams, yes. Ducky Brown copied the ones from these. These are the originals from 1979. And the guy said, "They're in such beautiful shape." I said, "If you buy good things and you take care of them,
They last forever.
have them." And so yes, I have shoes from college. I have lots of everything. And my husband has not seen every pair of shoes I own.
That's just better not to do that. Mine
Well,
hasn't seen mine either.
you see, it's not that I'm guilty or anything, because see, we both have different philosophies as far as wardrobe. He and I have both probably spent the same dollar amount on our wardrobes. I just have exponentially more items in mine. He has the perfect navy blazer and the perfect jogger boots and the perfect gray flannels and the perfect, all of that. And so the closet swap for him takes, from summer to winter, it takes about 20 minutes. For me, it's a 3-day affair. So, but that's okay. And one of the things that made me like him is he was okay with me and the whole wardrobe because there was one guy I went on exactly 3 dates. Date number 2 was, "Well, why do you have all of these clothes?" I said, "Did you not get that I'm in fashion?" And then date number 3, we were having lunch, and when the bill came, he got his pocket calculator out and calculated that I had to put down $2 extra for that extra iced tea. And I thought, okay, on top of being clueless, he's cheap. And so that was that. So, yes. Okay, it is time to start. So today we're going to be covering, because how I put this together is I like to make the different components and then assemble all the components into the coat. So today is a deep dive. Today is we're building the collar. And so the video, we're going to start with, here are the pieces, here they're cut out, and it's going to be it's about 50 minutes. I'm just warning you. So, get comfortable. And so as usual, give a shout out because, I won't be able to see chat or anything. So, any questions you have, don't be shy. But this is the collar is it's a deep dive, but you're going to enjoy it. So, if there are no questions before, or any questions before we begin?
Can I ask a quick question about the last email you sent me?
Yes.
On the back side,
Yes.
needing more space. The email said to give 5/8, and then there was a little 2 front and back.
Okay, it's 5/8. Oh, I'm sorry. I probably hit I typing
Okay,
thing.
and
Yeah. Because what and just for all of you, she sent me a photo, and from the back, there was a little bit of a drag on her left shoulder, and you could see that the center back, and it was just slight. It was not a lot.
Mhm.
It sort of angled a little bit towards the left. So what that told me is that she needed a little more room on the left side seam, then it would make everything hang straight. So if you just bring it out 5/8 of an inch front and back, blend it up to the waist, that should make that hang square.
so add 5/8 to the front and the back.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
the total will be 1.25 inches that you've added along that side, and that will make everything hang square.
Would everyone please make sure they're on mute? I'm getting a weird echo. Thank
Okay.
you.
I
Okay.
had a question, Kenneth. This is Linda.
Yeah.
The number of buttonholes when I want to put welt buttonholes and I have a boucle, not a real, it has a little bit more structure to it than most boucles.
Mhm.
I was trying to figure out if there's a buttonhole at the very top or if you even really need that.
You don't really need that at the top. And see, also, if it's the one at the top, since it folds out, you would want the buttonhole on the facing, but that's not absolutely necessary. You, as the designer, could choose not to have that there. Okay? Okay, so if there are no other questions, let us begin the, here we are, the collar. Collar, here we are. And I'll collapse this. And here we go. The collar. So now just, can everyone see this and hear it? Yes?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Yeah, because I like to check because sometimes it doesn't work the first time. So here we go. This is what we're going to be creating in this next lesson. So the collar has a little bit of structure. It's not as structured as, say, a full-on tailored collar, but it's fun to make. Now we have a lot to do, so let's get busy. Here you see the undercollar pattern piece with the face fabric. We also have cut this out of muslin and the tailoring canvas. Now I've worked ahead and I've drawn the stitching lines on one of the sides. But you want to draw the stitching lines on the tailoring canvas because this is going to be a stitching guide for our next step. So again, seam allowances are 1/2 inch, so that you measure in a 1/2 inch. And there we have that. So we are prepared for the next step. This is what I call framing the canvas. what we're doing here is we're replacing the seam allowances of the canvas with something much thinner, so that when you install this into a garment section, you don't have to worry about pressing, because the stitching line will be right about there. The muslin is far more flexible and easier to sew and easier to press. So let me show you how we make that. I worked ahead and pinned one of the canvas pieces to the muslin. And so here, again, we just want to line up the cut edges. Pin.
Kenneth, a question.
Yes.
The grain of the muslin and the grain of the interfacing,
Yes.
does it have to be the same
It all
direction?
matches. Yes. The
Okay.
fashion fabric, everything's on the same grain. And you'll see
Okay.
it'll make a little more sense as we go along.
Okay, just checking to make sure when I cut it out.
Okay. Now we have both pieces pinned off to the sewing machine. We can use either a zigzag or a serpentine stitch. I'm using the serpentine stitch. The stitch width is 5.0. The stitch length is 2.0. What you want to do is you want the zigzag to be just ever so slightly inside the pencil line. And if you're wondering, err on the side of a little too far in rather than too far out, because we're going to cut away the canvas right on the pencil line. So, and then the cut edge will be our stitching guide for later. This doesn't have to be pretty. You can use any old thread because this will be inside the garment. We have one finished, so I'll let you see what it looks like. There it is. And yes, we're being watched, just so you know. So I will go off camera, sew the other one, and then I'll meet you back at the work table. So here we are. We have both sides of the collar stitched. The next step is to trim. You want to trim close to or just slightly inside that pencil line. Now notice, this is a little trimming tip. Notice how, as I'm going along, I have the cut edges facing my palm. Now, the natural tendency for a lot of people is to come at it this way. The drawback is, first off, you end up cutting what's underneath. Also, you can't get so close. So how I like to think about it in my mind is like sliding a letter opener right along those zigzag stitches. Because this cut edge is going to be your stitching guide later. So you want it to be as accurate as possible.
Kenneth,
Yes.
you're cutting that pencil line just off, right? Like you're cutting on the inside of the pencil line?
That's correct.
Okay.
one. Step two, you want to trim out the excess muslin. On the inside, you don't want to have this hanging out inside your garment. It doesn't do any good. Because really what this muslin is doing is, like I said, we're creating a frame. Once I trim this away, I will explain why we're doing this. Okay, here we go. So let me explain. This side will go against the back of the face fabric. This will be inside. So when you stitch, you're going to stitch right outside the cut edge. So what will get caught in the seam is the muslin, not the canvas. You catch canvas in a seam, it makes it impossible to press flat. You have to get a hammer and tongs to flatten it. So this is one. I will go off camera and trim the other one. Here we are. We have both pieces. Our next step will be applying them to the face fabric. This is where we apply the canvas to the back of the face fabric. Now, a little explanation here. This is the side that we want to go against the back of the fabric. The reason for this is that when we're sewing, the stitch will sit right about there. And if there's any read through that might occur, the muslin acts as a buffer. If we actually were putting it this way, say if you have the canvas closer to the back of the fabric, what would happen, especially if it's a thinner fabric, you might get a read through of this crease when you're pressing, and it would show on this side, and then you would really regret it. So this is the thing to remember. Back of the fabric, muslin, canvas on the back. So knowing that, we're going to pin this together and tailor baste. For those who don't like to baste, there are times I try to get away without basting, but that's ready to wear. That is not what we're doing here. We want something better. So this is what it's going to look like. This is called a tailor baste. The tailor baste, generally you don't put a knot in your thread because you don't want to have to worry about it creating bumps. Stitch a couple of times to anchor. So the stitch runs perpendicular to the line of travel. You don't have to pull it tight. You just want it to hold the two layers together. The beauty of this particular stitch is somewhat like a pad stitch. Actually, it's a bigger pad stitch. It will stretch a little bit if you need it to. When you get to the other end, secure your thread. Voila. So here, we are now ready.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
That's at the neck edge you're doing that?
Yeah, it's at this will join to the body. This here is the outer edge of the collar.
Okay.
Okay. Come on. Two center back seams together, and I want that point there to match So we're matching up those corners. And same at this end. Those two corners match. And then we pin baste because we want to sew just outside those cut edges. So we're pinned. Now let's go over to the machine and sew. Now you can see I have put on my zipper foot. This is just a little precaution I like to take because you have fewer thicknesses here, more thicknesses here. So having the zipper foot on makes it so that these thicknesses don't really create a drag on the seam as you're sewing. Standard 2.5 stitch. Notice you're stitching just outside that edge.
Kenneth, it's Vivian. May I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
So when you pin, do you always pin parallel to the sewing line versus
Right.
perpendicular?
Yes, I do. Debates rage on that. I like to pin parallel and I like to pin directly on the stitching line. I feel you get a more accurate read. Generally also, a lot of times I will have a marked stitching line. But another advantage of that as opposed to pinning perpendicular is you can grab the head of the pin and the machine will actually pull the fabric off the pin. So you're less likely to hit the pin with your machine needle. Does that make sense? Okay, so let me do.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please do. Yes.
I like to baste everything. I just feel more confident. Is it okay if I pin it and then baste it?
Absolutely. See,
Okay.
there are a lot of times if I really want to make sure that it's going to turn out right the first time, basting is always a good thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. You will get no pushback on basting from me. Very wise old tailor used to say to me that basting is half sewn. Okay, other questions? Okay. So let's show you the result. So see, the stitch is just outside that edge there and here as well. So now I'll take this over to the pressing table, give it a press. I'll meet you at the pressing table. So we press as sewn. And here, this is where I like to get out my seam roll. And press this over the seam roll. Back to the work table. To control the seam allowances, I like to just sew a little bit of a catch stitch. So you're catching the seam allowance just to the canvas. And you can see I'm using a bright orange thread. You can use any color you want because it's going to be inside the garment. It'll be your little secret. Now this is what I call my catch stitch. I'm not using the absolutely dead correct 100% classic catch stitch because honestly, this is inside the garment and this is quicker. So as you can see, this stitch it's 45 degrees to the line of travel, and you take 2 bites at once. So like I said, it's not dead correct couture, but it works nonetheless. Now let me secure the thread. one thing I like to do here is to come in and trim down the seam allowances to about 1/8 of an inch. So that when we come across here or here, you don't have a ginormous bunch getting caught in that seam when you're stitching. This is just preemptive bulk reduction. I think we can make that as a term, preemptive bulk reduction. Okay, there's our center back seam. Next step. Now this is where you'll be glad you did your tailor basting on the lower part of your collar. We're going to be shaping it over the ham. So what you want to do, I like to anchor center back with a pin. And then bring it around so that the two fronts match. Now let me pin this and then I'll show you what I'm up to here. Okay, so this is the back. We want the two roughly to meet at the center front. And from here, we're going to build the turn of cloth in. So here, as you can see, you want to have that cut edge of the neck seam is going to be a little higher than this. This is going to overlap it a little. And so now what you're going to see here is you're going to see the turn of cloth. The face fabric is going to hang out from the edge. That's what you want. From here, I'm going to give it some steam.
Kenneth, it's Vivian. May I ask a question?
Yes. We're going to let the turn.
So your hem is a shape that I have not seen before. Is that specifically for collars?
No, this is just, I have different, I pick up different hams at flea markets and such. So if you had any other pressing ham, it would work just the same.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Kenneth, one quick thing while you're doing that, you look like you didn't touch the iron to it. It's only steam, correct? You're not so much pressing.
Yes, that's correct. Only steam. Okay. Okay. Cloth. We're going to let that occur. We can trim that off later. From here, I have more basting thread prepared, and then we're going to tailor baste the outer edge of this collar. Now, notice I have my hand underneath. You don't want to risk basting the two layers together or basting the collar to the ham, which I have done, and it's deeply embarrassing when that happens. So these basting stitches obviously will come out later. So I will work around to the other side and bring you back the result. So here we have the tailor basting, which makes this all now ready for the next step, which is the pad stitching.
And what does the tailor basting do? What's the purpose of it?
Well, the tailor basting holds all of the layers in the proper relationship, because, like, for example, on the collar, you want to build the turn of cloth in so that the collar will always naturally want to roll back into one position. And so, because we're going to be using some pad stitching later, this just holds everything in place until the pad stitching is sewn. Okay?
I have
Okay,
a question.
Yeah, yes. Go ahead.
Are you using your giant milliners again for basting?
Yes, I generally use my milliner's needles for just about everything.
How long are they? They are awesome.
They're fairly long. They're easily 2 inches.
Okay.
And they come in different sizes. That
Yeah.
you can get the variety pack, and yes, a short needle drives me crazy, so I use my milliner's needles.
Those are nice.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
We
Please.
use those, when I've done Susan Kelge's class, we use those Roxanne basting needles, those very long ones. Are they too thin for this?
Well, I tend to like a thick needle when I'm doing basting like this, because see, I'm really hard on my needles. I have a real kind of tight grip on my needles. I tend to bend them.
Those bend, that's why I'm asking, because
Yeah.
those Roxanne basting needles bend.
Well, I think the thing is you want to look at the fabric that you're going to be basting. If you're basting a silk that where the needle will leave a hole in the fabric, absolutely you want a finer needle. On something like this, I mean, you could use crowbars practically, and the fabric is not going to show the marks. So you would look at the effect of the needle on the surface of the fabric.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Kenneth,
Yes.
does the basting thread matter? You speak a lot of Mara 30.
Yeah.
Is that good to use?
That's just what I use. Any old, actually Susan Calgi sells some really good basting thread. Hers is cotton. The Mara 30 is polyester. And, for a lot of what she does, and I understand this, it's easy to break with your hands. Any old thread. I think the thing is you just want to baste. The thread, you don't want the thread to leave marks on something. So if I were basting something like a wool sateen, I wouldn't be using the Mara 30. I would be using like a silk thread, because you run the risk of leaving impressions in the fabric when you steam, and so you have to think about the thread. It's like the thread and the needle. You don't want to leave any marks in the fabric that can't come out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Shaped.
I have a question.
Yes.
Lay it out flat.
Go
Um,
ahead.
I think I missed. Could you repeat how much to turn the collar down?
Well, you just
When you,
when you're turning it, when you're putting it on the ham, you want the cut edge of the collar edge to hang over the cut edge of the seam allowance that sews to the neck seam by about a 1/2 inch. I mean,
Okay,
I don't get the micrometer out and measure it. You just want, because see, when the collar is in place, the collar edge is going to hang over the seam, the neck seam. So I like to steam it in that shape so that it will naturally want to do that when you're wearing it.
okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Okay. So other questions? Okay.
What you can see is that it really doesn't want to lay flat anymore because you've actually built some turn of cloth into it. So the pad stitching, the first row of pad stitching, I'm going to pad stitch kind of on the top of this fold, and then the pad stitching will be a little more dense in what's called the stand of the collar, and it will be a little more sparse on the fall or the flap. So what that's going to look like, for those who've never done pad stitching before, the object here, it's like a very tiny tailor baste, and the object is just to barely catch the fabric underneath. If you get it right on a textured fabric like this, you just won't see it. So you anchor your thread. And it's just a little tiny tailor base. The needle points 90 degrees to the line of travel. The stitches are, I'd say, about 3/8 of an inch apart. You don't have to pull it too tightly. You just want to marry these, the interfacing and the body fabric together. one thing to know about is you notice I'm using single strand, and I iron the thread. Debates rage over whether you wax your thread or not. I don't wax the thread because this is polyester thread, and wax doesn't have anywhere to go if you iron it. If you're using a cotton thread, yes, absolutely, you would wax it because that lubricates the thread and it also preserves it. But for polyester, I iron, and that makes it so it sews without any trouble. Now I will go all the way around and finish and bring back the result. Here we are at the end. And obviously, because this is such a high texture, you don't see the stitches in this fabric. Now, one way to gauge a stitch to see that you've picked enough fabric but not too much, as you can see here, my finger is starting to get chewed up. I do this by feel. If the needle, I know how much, if the needle will scrape just on my fingertip, I know that I've gotten enough. So you can see here, so I have sewn to here. Next, I'm going to fill in the stand. Now the second row of stitches, I like to take the bite midway between these two. Just a personal preference. You don't have to, you can have them line up. I just find it controls it better. And when hand sewing, like I said, I iron the thread, and also you don't want the thread much longer than the distance from your hand to your elbow, because what you run into then is you're wrangling too much thread and you waste time with the thread that you wrangle. Some people think that by threading a needle with like 2 yards of thread in it, they're saving time. They're actually not. It gets caught on everything. It tangles. It's just a mess. So if you don't have that as part of your hand sewing habits, get into it. So now I'm just going to turn around and come back the other way, because that's really what we're going to be doing. So again, third row, we just turn around and come back the opposite way. And so what's going to happen is the stitches are going to angle towards each other. That's how they get that. It's just going up one row and down the other. Now, one thing I have seen, this is what I hate about single thread, it comes undone. So what I have seen people do is use a blind hem machine for pad stitching. Now I've tried it. I find it's just much easier for me just to hand sew it. It's quicker too and more satisfying. It's very meditative. Sew down to this end, and then I will go off camera and finish filling in one side, because this is like watching paint dry if you're not doing it yourself. So secure the thread here. So you can see the stitches kind of point towards each other. That is as it should be. I will go off camera and fill in the rest of this here and bring it back. So here is one half of the collar. You can see also I have removed the tailor basting because it has served its purpose. Now I will work ahead and pad stitch the other side of the collar, because once we have this filled, we want to deal with the flap. I will be back with the results. We're almost done. Okay. Now,
Hi, Kenneth. I have a question.
Yes.
With the pad stitching, I just want to confirm, you're not catching the fabric underneath.
Yes, you are.
You are.
Yes, you see,
Okay.
see, pad stitching is, fusibles these days kind of take the place of pad stitching, not as well, in my opinion. But there are what you're doing with the pad stitching is you're locking the canvas to the outer fabric.
Okay.
And it creates it creates stiffness. It also is going to lock in the turn of cloth. It gives the entire thing, the entire collar, a lot more body. And so if the boucle that I've used, I mean, you could sew with Frankenstein stitches. You'll never see those pad stitches. If you're sewing on something with a little, like a wool flannel or something, you will see little puckers on the underside of the collar. But that's a mark of quality.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. But when you're sewing it, you're just taking a little nick of the fabric that's underneath, the actual fabric.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like, and like I showed with my finger, I know how it feels on my finger when I have taken the right stitch. And this is something that you will, if you do a little bit of practice, you will learn very quickly how it will feel on your finger when you've taken the right bite.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
And there's no significance to this thread. We could use matching thread.
Yeah. Well, this kind of matches, because there's a
Oh,
lot.
that's true.
Yeah. So I would use the color of thread that you want, the color of the thread of the face fabric. Okay.
Kenneth,
Yes.
you did it in halves. If
Yeah.
you continue to do it all the way around and then back and forth,
You could
does
do
that-
that. Yes, you absolutely could. I chose to do it in halves just so that you could see what I was doing and it wouldn't be like watching paint dry.
Okay, so it doesn't affect the turn of cloth or anything.
Okay, so we good? Okay, so let everyone turn off their mute their. Okay, we're good. Okay, so let us continue.
Have the stand pad stitched. Now we want to pad stitch the flower. That is not so dense. We're going to run the stitching lines, I'd say about 3/8 of an inch apart. But then I'm going to show you a little trick for the corners. I have the first row past the roll, about 3/8 of an inch away. Now, this is where I'm going to show you a little trick here. Take some of this basting loose. Here for now. So this is a square. This is just muslin. It can be cut on the bias or it can be cut on the straight grain. It is about 2.5 inches deep. And what we're going to do is we're going to put it between the two layers. Sit there. There's the edge. See the edge. That's what we want to know, that piece right there. You can trim away everything else later. But what we're going to do now is we're going to sew pad stitches across and through this little piece of muslin that we have installed. The object here is we don't want our collar points to wing up like donkey ears. And so This is a little reinforcement that you can do. So the first row secures the little piece of muslin between the layers. And then the second row, we start the work. So now we want to curl this over our hand. With each row of stitching, we're going to build a curl. We want this to want to pull around. We're going to all the layers.
Oh, that's my question. I
And
was
stitches
through all the layers now.
Yeah, through all the layers, yes.
are closer together. The rows are closer together. We want more control in this area. And so again, I'll sew one more row and then continue off camera. You can see we're starting to build a roll in there. So I will just continue and keep rolling this. And I will bring it back when I'm finished. Okay. So you can see this is really what we want. We want that to pull backwards. From here, I will fill in the rest of the pad stitching and bring it back to show you the result. And here is the finished pad stitched collar. Now these ends we're going to press flat when we go to the pressing table. But before we go to the pressing table, we just want to trim off any excess muslin so it doesn't hang us up later. Now that that's done, we will take this over to the pressing table and press. First, we want to press the collar point. So you can see that will flatten out. And then you want to press that side and then come in. And press this side. So I will repeat on the other side. Press the point. Press that and the stand. Here we are. So from here, I also like to just give a little bit of stretch. If you stretched it too much to join it to the upper collar, no big deal. So here we have the undercollar. Next, we will join the undercollar with the upper collar. Here we have the upper collar. And what I have done is I've cut 2 snips at the center back so that we can match that to the undercollar. And before we join the two, I'm going to just stretch this starting at center back It's not going to stretch a lot. It will stretch more or less depending on your fabric. But what this does, you can see here, pull out a little bit, you can see this little bit of lift here. This is going to make the upper collar sit better on the neck. And since this is cut on the cross grain, you're going to get a little more stretch. So we will go now to the work table and join this to the undercollar. One thing you want to do before you join the undercollar to the upper collar is trim off any of this edge that may have found its way out. Because you want the cut edge of the muslin to be your stitching guide. So there's not a lot here to trim, but it doesn't hurt to be accurate. Ready to join the two. Now I've worked ahead matching the center back and matching the cut edges of the upper collar with the under collar. Now you can put more or fewer pins in. I'm going to be using more pins. So then from here to here, what I'm looking at is I want to match first the corner and work backwards from the corner. So that's the corner there. Now I'm pin basting. You could, after you have it all pinned, you could hand baste it. That's entirely okay. Now you notice the upper collar is a little bit longer. That's a good thing. You just turn it like this and they will match so that when you sew them together, you won't get a buckle on the undercollar. Also with the undercollar, it's on the bias, so it's going to conform to the upper collar. Here we are. Matched to the corner. And then now I like to have these two edges match because you want a little extra on the upper collar so it comes up and over and matches the curve. Don't pin them one to one. You see your collar is going to roll over like that. So you want the two layers. It's better to pin them in the contour that they will be living in the garment. It just makes for better sewing.
Kenneth, I have a question.
Yes.
Just to repeat that, the undercollar is favored to the inside.
Well, I wouldn't say favored. Let's not use the word favored, but you want the undercollar uppermost. When this goes through the machine, which you'll see in a moment, the upper collar or the outer collar is going to sit on the feed dogs. And so because the upper collar is slightly larger than the under collar. So when you're pinning, as you can see, I sort of rolled it, bowed it in so that the upper collar would distribute across that seam. And so when we sew it, you'll try to hold it in the same curve when you're machining it, but having the upper collar against the feed dogs is going to help you with that. The feed dogs will help ease the upper collar onto the under collar because that's essentially what we're doing. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
So now what I will do is I'm going to do the little trick at the corners that I showed you to turn the corners. Now, if you remember the little trick I showed you turning the corners on the cuff latch, I'm doing the same.
We'll cover that in the cuff latch, but you'll get to see how that works here too.
Here, you can see I'm using black buttonhole thread, and I'm actually wanting to catch it through the muslin because that is going to be a little stronger than catching it through the face fabric. So now that we're all set up and ready to go, let's go to the machine. And we're going to start out, as you can see, I'm using my zipper foot because I do love it. I'm going to start out with a standard 2.5 stitch. And we're going to sew right next to that cut edge. Now, when we get to here, we're going to shorten the stitch to 0.75, and we're going to go just outside that little loop. And turn it 2 or 3 stitches. Turn again. So for another 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch, lengthen the stitch back. Continue on. And again, shorten the stitch, 0.75. Just outside the little thread loop. 2 or 3 stitches. Stitch for about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. Lengthen the stitch back to the 2.5. And finish. So let me show you the result here. So you can see. And that little loop then remains intact, so you can trim really close. We'll trim that out, but let's do all of that at the pressing table. First step is to get rid of this little bit of seam allowance. You don't need it, it adds bulk. And see, aren't you glad you engaged in preliminary bulk reduction? From here, we're going to press as sewn. And now I want to press the seam allowances open. So that will require the point presser. As we did on the cuff latch, it's much easier to press seam allowances open before you trim the corners. So I'm just, as you can see, I'm pressing the ends first. And then I will press this edge here.
Kenneth, do you have a resource for that point turner? That looks really nice.
This one, this one was called the June Taylor point presser. There is a reproduction, I want to say, on Etsy, because this particular one, June Taylor, doesn't make it anymore. But I've had several people say that they see it on Etsy.
Thank you.
Okay.
pressed. Next, trimming. So the trimming, you're going to cut right across there. Again, that's why you have those extremely short stitches. And then I'm going to trim a steep angle here and a steep angle here. From here, I will trim the undercollar seam allowances to 1/4 inch, or half of the 1/2 inch, just half the seam allowance. So we'll go a little ways here. So that's what our trimming will look like. I will continue on to the other end and bring back the results. Now that everything is trimmed, we can turn this right side out. So the first pass at this is going to be using
Yes.
the point turner.
Leave the upper collar at the 1/2 inch seam allowance.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay.
Try to get this turned as much as possible. And then here is the thread, the anchor thread. See, is that not a thing of beauty? I'll trim that off later.
Was there a question? Okay.
Turn the other one. You know, there are many different ways to turn corners crisply. And, you know, I'm always looking for that one that works the best. And this seems to work pretty darn well. So yeah, so we turn this, and you're pushing really on the undercollar side because you've got more canvas, got more support. And then when you get it as far out as you can push it, then take it the rest of the way out with this. And you can use this to pull, to press, and then you trim it off later. So now that we're turned right side out, this is where we start to press. Now we're going to favor the edge to the undercollar. And so I'm going to get out the pressing ham. I just think it's going to be better. And the pressing cloth. So if you can't really see this, I don't want to mar this fabric because someone is actually going to be wearing this. So pressing cloth. And yes, pressing it over a ham,
Yes.
it is going to live.
It's Vivian again. So
Yeah.
you have a cross, you have marked your pressing cloth. with
Okay,
a
well, that's actually not entirely necessary. My pressing cloth does double duty. Another thing I use my pressing cloth for is taking patterns from existing garments. So the lengthwise and crosswise grain lines that I have marked on that are for that purpose.
Okay,
Okay?
thanks.
Kenneth,
Yes,
just one question. The pressing cloth fabric, what is that?
it's a silk organza.
Ah, okay.
And the reason I use silk organza is you can see through it. You know, many were the times when I would be using like a cotton drill or whatever that was damp, and I would end up pressing creases where I didn't want them. So I learned just use the silk organza because you can see, you can check your work and you can make sure you're not pressing creases where you don't want them.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
On
Thank
the
you.
body. It's not going to live on a flat surface. So I just like pressing curves over a ham when you absolutely want it to sit flat. Here we are. So let me press this I will come back and show you the results.
Kenneth,
Yes.
I just looked on Amazon and they have, Amazon Canada has one of the June Taylor boards left.
Well, you know, if it's something you want, I would highly recommend it. But thank you for that.
Okay. So there is our corner. I'll trim that off later. And you can see the seam favors to the back. That's as it should be. I have to favor that just a tiny bit. And so next, what I want to do is to baste around the collar edge. So this is our beloved tailor baste again. We want these edges to sit nice and flat. And you want to baste that curve in. So we're done with this. We can trim these off. And it's starting to look like a collar. Next, we want to build in the turn of cloth for the upper collar. So what I'm going to do here is smooth this out flat and fold and pin. Because we want to make sure the fabric is snug.
How far are you folding it over? I see that you're not folding it in half.
Well,
So
you just need to put a bend somewhere, say about an inch or so up from the finished edge. Because see, the object here, you fold it in the direction that the collar will fold when you're wearing it. And so whether the fold is exactly where the top of the roll of the collar will be, or if it's a little bit closer to the edge, not really crucial at this point. You just want to get the fabric folded and secured.
okay,
Okay?
thank you.
Against each other. Now, what you're going to see here, that's not going to kill you. That's why I do this. We add a turn of cloth in that is actually added to the upper collar, but sometimes, depending on the thickness of the fabric, you're going to have a little mismatch. That's not going to kill you. So what I will do here, come in here and pin. And center back, match the center back. Once I pin that, I will go off camera and tailor baste that and bring it back here. We have these layers basted together. Now you can unpin these. So you've built your turn of cloth in. Now it's going to want to sit nicely. Next step will be going to the machine to do a machine based at 1/2 inch to hold all of these layers together. This is just a machine based at 1/2 inch.
Kenneth?
Yes.
Vivian, So all the previous basting so far today has been hand done, and now
Yeah.
we're doing a machine based. Why?
Well, this secures that edge so that later on when we actually put it onto the coat, you have a stitching guide.
And why not do it by hand?
I just like doing it by machine. It's quicker and I feel it's more secure.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Can I ask a quick question too?
please.
It looks like you're basting a 1/2 inch from the cut edge of the undercollar. That's correct?
That's correct, yes.
It's not matched?
It's not matched because, you know, depending on your fabric, this fabric is a little thicker than I normally work with. So it took a little more turn of cloth. So I use the undercollar as my guide because you don't want to lose any width.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
That will be in the seam allowance. And now we will take this over to the pressing table and shape it on the ham to finish. As you can see, I have it so that seam allowance goes underneath the edge of the collar and it meets at the center front. And it really just needs a little steam. There you are. A thing of beauty. Now, one thing, see how that curves down? That's what you want. That will make it so that your points don't look like donkey ears. So there is the collar. Back to the work table. And here we have details. We have the collar, which turned out quite nicely, if I may say so myself. And we have the cuff latches,
Which we'll be doing next.
Now, this is where we would have a discussion of top stitching, because up until now we haven't really needed it, but I do think that we want to talk about it. There are different methods for top stitching. What I'm going to be choosing for this particular fabric will be a little different than what you might choose because there is such a texture on this fabric. But our next topic is musings on top stitching.
Okay, so let's see. So is everybody glazed over yet? Okay, so any questions? Because, you know, I'm going to put in, I should have just run the cuff latch first, but they both kind of match. So the cuff latch is about 10 minutes. But I just want to kind of check in and see, is everybody okay? Has anyone fainted dead away from exhaustion? Okay. So questions before we go on?
Yeah, Kenneth, that was a lot, but just you may have mentioned this already. The tailoring canvas, does that actually have a grain?
Yes, it does.
Is there salvages that we can see it, or?
Yeah, when you buy it, you know, there will be a selvage on it that you can see it.
I've never used, actually, I do have a piece.
Okay, on this one, the lines in the canvas are the straight of grain.
Great, thank you.
So Richard, you had a question.
Yeah, about the serpentine stitch, can I just do straight stitching? Because my machine doesn't do.
Do you have a zigzag?
I don't have.
Well,
I only use industrial sewing machine.
Okay, so what I do in that case is I run 2 rows of straight stitches, you know, one about 1/16 of an inch from the drawn line, and then 1/4 of an inch past that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so let us learn how to make the cuff latch. There's, let's see, cuff latch. Here we are. Okay. No, not that one, the other one. There we go. Okay. Cuff latch. So here we have the pattern for the cuff latch, and we have the lining and the face fabric cut. The lining I cut on the bias, and the face fabric I actually cut on the cross grain so that the texture would match with the texture of the sleeves on the coat. So this is the pattern. These are the pieces. Now, let's get busy. Since we cut both pieces out of the same pattern piece, we want to actually shave 1/8 of an inch off of each edge on the lining so that the seams will favor to the inside. So what that looks like here is that much off, not a lot. And do try to work with a sharp rotary cutter. So 1/8 of an inch off each edge be just fine. So next, we want to pin these two right sides together. You can see that I've pinned one side first, and I like pin basting rather than pinning perpendicular. I find you get more control. So the easy way to get these two edges to match is just to fold this over, and you can see when you fold it over, the edges automatically match. So again, pin based all along. So there we are. And then we can come back here and match that corner. And then you're just going to ease the face fabric slightly onto the lining. When you're favoring, that is what you do. I like having the lining, which is going to be the smaller of the pieces, together. I like the lining pinned on the top, because that way the feed dogs on the machine will do the work. Now, before I go over to the machine, what I have done, since we're using 1/2 inch seam allowances, I marked there. I want to know that intersection, because there's a little trick I'm going to show you when we get over to the machine so that we can actually turn that corner and pull it tightly when we turn it right side out. Now, this is a little trick that I use to turn my corners. I'm using white thread because it's a little easier to see, but normally I would use something that matches. This is buttonhole thread, or Mara 30. And so what I want to do here is I want to make a little tiny loop right at that corner. And so when I pull the stitch, what I will eventually do then is thread this into the needle. So you have both ends of the thread going through the needle. So it's going to create a loop. Especially challenging when you're doing it through a camera. Okay, so here we have the thread. And on the back, you just see a little tiny stitch. And like I said, if it were in the same color as what you're sewing on, you really wouldn't notice it. So then I'd like to come in here and bury that right there. And you
tunnel in between the layers and have it emerge somewhere out here. So this then that point there, it kind of ties that off so that when we sew, and I'm going to show this running through the machine, we will sew right up to there with short stitches, one across, and then sew back this way. When we turn it right side out, we'll use this to pull this corner tight. So now, let's put this under the machine and sew. Seam allowances are 1/2 inch. Stitch length is your standard 2.5. As we work up to the corner here, I like to shorten the stitch to 0.5 to 0.75. You want a very short stitch as you're going around corners.
Kenneth, question.
Yes.
Did you put your little loop on that corner as well?
No, just the sharper end.
Okay.
Okay. I
Why
mean,
do-
well, this is a little easier to turn out crisply. This, since you have such a narrow angle there, sometimes it's difficult to get your point turner up into that corner.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. Lengthen it again. I generally shorten and lengthen about 1/4 inch from where we turn. Okay, so now this is where get a better look at this. So this stitch length is 0.5, 0.75. Turn, stitch one, yeah, actually, and then about 1/4 inch or so, and then lengthen the stitch back to your standard 2.5. Now, one of the things I'm going to show you, as we're sewing the second side, see how I fold that? That's going to, it'll sort of reinforce the favoring. Let me show you the result. Extremely short stitches there and here. An extremely short stitch at these corners makes it so that you can trim close and you can turn it, and you don't have to worry so much about the fabric bursting at the corners. Next, the pressing table. Before we trim, it's a good idea to press everything as sewn. This may seem counterintuitive, but since I want to press these seam allowances open, it really is easier to press the seam allowances open before you trim these corners. So what that's going to look like, where you want your point presser, you have to press this in sections. So there we are. See, it is easier to manage. Have an entire seam allowance. And you just open it up and press it a little at a time. And we turn it over, press the other side.
And you can see here, far easier to press it open before you trim all those seam allowances. Okay, so we have now both seam allowances pressed. Put that out of the way. This is where we trim. So here, so you can get within about 1 millimeter of that stitching. And see, this is where some people get a little shy, but that's why you have short stitches there, so you can trim quite close in there. So then again, start a steep angle here, and a steep angle here. But you want to remove as much bulk as you can get out of there. So there you have a little extra trim there. There's one. Now let me trim the other. This doesn't, you don't have to trim quite so much because it's a flat angle. There. So next, I will turn this right side out. When you're starting to turn this right side out, this point, you just want to start it with the point turner just to get it going. And then you can use the heel end of the point turner to push everything through. And what I'd say is don't let it bunch up too much here. It might mar your fabric. So once you can get a hold of it here, then you can turn it right side out. So now, this angle here, I'm just going to slip the point turner back in and just make that a nice point. And then here, before you use your thread, you want to turn it as much as you can before you rely on the thread. But then this is where, okay, sorry about that. This is where the thread comes in. You can see here it is. Now, what you're just going to do is gently, gently give it a pull. And it may break, it may not, but there you have it. A nice, crisp edge. Let me give this a press, and I'll show you the results. I like to press it from the back. And now you can see how the seams are favoring towards the lining. Now, notice that little corner here. Not as crisp as I would like, so I'm going to show you another little trick for making it press more crisply. Again, with your buttonhole thread, you use this. Then I'm going to press this without the pressing cloth so you can see what I'm doing here. So take both ends and you pull. There you go. I might even do it on this one too, just to reinforce that. So, sorry. So there you go. You have nice, crisp corners. Now, let's go back to the work table. And here we have the cuff latches. Now I'm planning on a top stitch, but I'm going to cover the top stitching later, so I will set these aside. We're finished with the cuff latches.
Okay, questions?
Yes.
Uh,
You, since you block fused your face fabric,
It's impossible.
do you, is there any need for any additional interfacing in the cuff latch?
You know, it couldn't hurt, you know, if you, to do a little bit of Pellon on the ends if you've not block fused.
Okay.
It just reinforces those two corners so that you can really tug on them with the buttonhole thread.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay, who else has questions?
Kenneth, you said that you shaved off an 1/8 of an inch off the lining,
Yes.
which we saw you do, but did you also do it on the short sides or only on the long edges?
No, just the long edges.
Just the long edges, okay.
Somehow the
Thank you.
short end kind of takes care of itself.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay, other
Yes,
questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Did you block fuse the entire coat?
Well, what I did is I just took it over to, there's a place here that block fuses yardage. So I just had the entire yardage fused. And then, so it's all, you know, it was all, I was able to cut everything out. So yes, the entire coat is block fused. The reason you would want to block fuse the entire coat is if you fuse, say, the fronts and the backs, but not the sleeves, it would look a little different. It would hang a little different. There would just, you know, it would be something that would be like, you couldn't really put your finger on it if you didn't know, but you would know that something was wrong with those sleeves.
Okay.
So yeah.
Oh, and what type of lining did you use for this coat?
It was an acetate jacquard. It is, the weight is about like a Duchess satin.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so other questions?
One more question. What type of interfacing did you use to block fuse?
This was called a weft, a fusible weft. That was the technical term. You know, there are all sorts of different weights that you can request, and the place it's called MK Cutting here in New York. If you're, if you're in this area, and you just go, the guy's name is Kevin, and you just go and you know, they have all sorts because they do cutting and all of other kinds of things for the industry. And so I just went in and I just said, I need a fusible weft, and he knew, you know, kind of what to do.
Okay, now could you use a fusible weft in place of the Pellon when you?
I would use, the only place I would use the Pellon is for when we set in the pockets. But if you have a fusible weft and you don't have a Pellon, that would work just fine.
Yes, because I find the Pellon is almost like a papery type.
Yeah, well, you see, it's for my purposes, that is a plus, because generally, you know, when I'm putting the pockets in, which we're going to get to, I think next week or the week after, and you've done the welt pocket, so you know kind of how I do it. I just like the Pellon, kind of like, because it's a non-woven, and so you can see the stitching lines that you've sewn, and you can really get in there and do accurate cutting. But if you have like a fusible weft or fusible tree, that would work as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So other questions?
Is there another name for Duchess satin?
Duchess satin, well, you know, I don't know, because see, bridal satin, Duchess satin, they're similar weights. Bridal satin, to my eye, is a little shinier. Duchess satin has a little more of a matte finish. The French call it Duchesse satin. But I call it Duchess satin because I live in the United States and I'm a Luddite. But I don't know any other name for that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So other questions? Are your brains full?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, you know, we're pretty much to the end of our class time. So I'm glad your brains are full. That's the idea here. So your homework is at least the cuff latches. If you feel very adventurous, you can start on the collar as well. And see, these are two things that you can go ahead and do right now, even if you're still fitting your muslin. So, you know, it's kind of like a working ahead thing.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So I've recorded the Zoom session, at like before, what I will do is I will, you know, I probably later this evening, I will, I have to it has to download, and then I'll download it to YouTube, and then I will send you the links for the collar and the cuff latch and the Zoom meeting, so that you have all of that you can review. So you'll have all three of those.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then. So I think our work is done.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Lori,
Thank
you had a-
you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
so you had a question, Lori?
Are we talking top stitching at another time then?
Yes, that's going to be next week.
Awesome.
Yeah, because there are different things, because the top stitching that I'm using on the coat that I'm working on is a little different, but so I'm just kind of going, oh, these are the different ways you can do top stitching.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a lovely afternoon, Kenneth.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Okay then.